Okay, so we've got our, well, last you saw in the last video, we left off where we're putting a cabling system in. So the tops of the pillars, you can see we got the top caps installed with the guide holes in each of the caps are going towards the runway. And there's two of those plates that have 4 mounting screws on the top of it. We've got the one on the post that's going to have the pump, and then the other one we have in the opposite corner per the instructions. But as the instructions stated, all the cabling that you need for the RAM system is already pre-strung underneath. It's all zip tied in place. So when you cut the zip ties loose, you'll see kind of where the cables are just naturally laying as to which direction they feed, and then which section of the lift they go to. And there's also a cable routing guide in the manual as well, so make sure that you pay attention to that. But for instance, this is the front of the lift here. You can kind of see that this cable, based on where it comes out at and where it's going to go to and kind of where it's routed, that this naturally is going to go to this column here, and the one on this side, which is a little bit longer, is going to exit out that side of the ramp or runway, go that direction to be the right side front of the lift. So just cut your tie wraps loose, let the cables down, and like I said, you can see just by the way they're laying kind of which directions they go. But as the instruction says, you do have this hydraulic hose that goes to your ram that's zip tied in a couple places along with your cabling. Make sure that when you're cutting your zip ties loose that you don't nick into this cable, otherwise you're gonna have a bad day. I'll talk to you later. Bring it back when we get all the cabling strung and we have them run to the posts. Okay, I'm going to bring you back for a quick update on the cabling. We're getting our cabling pulled through the necessary channels and run to the correct side, but I wanted to show you this cabling real quick. In case you're wondering how to get that big old adjustable cable with its 2 fasteners through what looks to be too tight of a bend, a little bit of a trick to it. It would be easier if you took the bolts and the washer off, but I'm going to show you here. So I found that if you go in here at an angle, so that's your little cutout right up there on the side of the beam runway, go in at an angle, and I'll go to the outside here. You can see where I'm coming out of the side here. Maintain this angle, and we're coming out here, and you'll notice we were able to pull it through. Now all you gotta do is just keep pulling the cable until you get it the rest of the way through, and there you go. So it looks like it's a little bit of a tight fit, and it looks like you may be thinking to yourself that you have to remove the guide pins or the rollers or anything of that nature. It's not necessary. It just takes that little bit of a trick, and it does work on all 4 corners. Again, put it up at an angle. Grab it through, continue that angle forward, and as you can see here, you'll get those cables out of those corners. I'll bring you back in a bit. And welcome back. We've got a little further than what you saw in the last video. We've got our cabling run, as you can see there. Got finished running up through the pulleys. And make sure that you're paying attention to the manual when you do run your cabling. And that through the bottom pulley here, it comes up and kind of snakes around the opposite side of this one. You just want to make sure that you're not on this side of that. And again, there's a picture of this in the manual. Just be cautious about the direction that you're running that cabling in. But you can see we've got them tied up to the top of their pillars, not tied, but bolted to the top of their pillars. And we have gone through and cycled the lift a couple of times and got these adjusted. And I'll show you the method that we use to adjust our lift to make sure that the locks would engage, or I should say click slash engage, whatever term you like to use, at the same time. But the pump, as you can see, obviously is mounted, and the manual referenced having 2 of these flat washers, one on this corner, and you can see one on that corner there. And I didn't see one of the hardware bags that was specifically had extra flat washers in it. So what we did, the runways, if you remember, come shipped, bolted to a temporary metal bracket. And all that temporary hardware, each of the bolts had a washer. So we just took 2 of that was used to bolt everything together again to that temporary shipping setup. We just took 2 washers off it and used what was needed to put on the corners of this bracket when it was mounted. And we're going to jump down here and point out a few more kind of nice to know things that, and one thing that kind of got us during the install. And again, we're making some mistakes here and documented it so that hopefully you don't. The release linkage, or the safety linkage here, this is the linkage that you pull towards you when you hit the release lever on the pump to kind of lower things. Initially, we had to lift, per the manual, the minimum of 2 foot away from the wall. But when you're doing your install, the length of this release rod, because it goes in through the cross member here and bolts into a linkage inside the runway here, I should say screws into a linkage inside the runway here, was too long, or was long enough that we didn't have enough space between the wall and the lift to get this rod in here. So we ended up literally having to push this lift away from the wall, probably about another foot, about a foot to a foot and a half, in order to get enough clearance to be able to push this rod through this cross member and then bolt it in place. So keep that in mind, that even though your finished install, you may end up closer to the wall like we will. We may come in another 1 to 2 inches on this, just due to the length of the garage. We can't go too much further back than what we already are, because the garage we have, it starts to downward slope to help for drainage. So we're actually going to come a little bit more closer to the wall to make sure all 4 columns are sitting nice and flat and level. But which means this will still work, but just keep that in mind that that you're going to need some extra room between, if you're close to a wall, between here and here, in order to get this release lever for this interlock installed. And let's see, we covered that. We've got our cables installed. We haven't put the covers on that you can obviously see here, because we wanted to make sure that everything was okay with the cable routing and everything functioned normally before we put the covers that are provided. Basically they're protective covers to keep anything from getting in the pulleys when they're moving, keep you from getting pinched by linkage, things of that nature. We do have our stop plates installed, and these don't really bolt in place, and you'll see this in the manual. They slide in between this little groove here, and they are also a set on the back. But if this were the rear and you were putting your approach ramps on, just like the manual states, you'd pull these out, put your approach ramps in, put your vehicle up here, take the approach ramps off, and then put your stop plates back into place. And just to kind of show you what we did for the getting the lift, those little cable points are adjustable, as the manual states. And to show you what we did to make sure that we got the lift squared away, so that these cams, when you're raising up, they click in all in unison. What we found out the easiest, and I'm not suggesting that you do this, to each their own. I'm going to raise the lift up here a little bit, so you'll have to pardon the noise. And then I'm going to stop. So right now the lift is being supported by the hydraulics. So you definitely want to do this when you do not have a vehicle on it. Again, I'm not saying for you to do this. This is just the method that we used. And you can see that cam right there hasn't come up far enough to start to come out and get ready to lock into the next rectangular, or the next locking point. But you'll notice there's a gap now between, let's go down here so you can see this a little bit better, between here and here. So then with the lift stopped like this, we just took a tape measure and measured from the bottom of this lock to the bottom of the channel that it's currently on. And then we took that measurement and made sure it was the same on all 4 columns. So if we had to raise a particular side up or down, once we had our base measurement, which we actually took on the far corner over there, we just picked one post, used it for our base, and then come around to the other 3, took that same measurement, and then used the adjusting screw in that. And you'll have to forgive pretty bright shop lights in here. And then just use the adjusting screws on that cable to raise this particular side either up or down to get that measurement the same on all 4. And then that will, at least in our case, allow these cams or locking cams, however you want to call them, to engage at the same rate all the way around as we're raising the lift up. And what we'll do is we're going to go around now that we have raised and lowered the lift a few times, we're going to go around and get our protective covers put onto this area here and take care of that, because one thing you want to be mindful of is anytime you're playing around with the lift, you definitely don't want to operate it without these covers in place. They're there for a very good reason. In this case, again, we left them off to make sure that everything was functioning correctly, that the releases were working, that the locks were working, that the cable was doing what it needed to do. And as for the pump itself, obviously pretty straightforward install on the pump. For the oil, per the manual, we just picked up a jug of this, the 2.5 gallon jug from Northern Tool that was labeled as ISO 32. So per the manual, they were looking for ISO 32 hydraulic oil. This seemed to fit the bill. Seems to be working pretty good. Obviously, use what's applicable to you in your area. If you don't have a Northern Tool, then you may be able to find, I'm sure you can find hydraulic oil at many other places. Just make sure that what you're getting matches what the manual says that you should be using in this setup. But we're going to get the covers installed and we'll bring you back. And welcome back. I think this will be the final update, or final summary update in this install. As you can see, we've got the protective covers now installed on all 4 corners. And a couple more additional tips. The manual states when you're putting this hose in is to route this in such a way that it doesn't get caught up in any of the like this cross member that moves up and down. In other words, you don't want it sagging below this lip and then getting caught. Well, when putting this cover on, there's at least this is what we used it for. There's a little bag of hardware that comes with this clamp right here. I didn't use the screw that came with it because this cover has its own set of hardware, but you can see how we kind of routed the hose here. So from the runway out, just kind of curled it a little bit, and put that clamp underneath that screw, the lower screw for this cover right here. And as you can see, it does a good job of keeping the slack hose here, but still allowing this to move up and down as needed, but then keeping the hose out of way of getting caught up underneath this lip of this cross member. So again, that's what we use it for. It didn't really state one way or another where exactly to put this as far as the manual, but that's what we used it for, and then as you can see, it seems to work out just fine. And we did opt for the optional accessory, and this is that car jack I was telling you about in part 1 of this series that allows you to pick up either the back or the front, obviously depending on where you have it in the runway and where you have the vehicle positioned. So you can still have your vehicle sitting on a 4-post lift, but be able to jack up the front or the rear using this system here. Now this is the air version of this system. As you can see, air hydraulic pump there. And unfortunately I can't demo this for you, but Musty One does have a follow-up video with his Oldsmobile, in which he does use this lift, so you'll see it there. And also in his video where he installed his lift, he operates this as well, just so you can see it. We haven't installed the air system in this shop yet, so it's the reason why I can't show it to you now. But I will say, I said this before in the beginning video about having an engine hoist, and the manual does state to have one. Again, absolutely necessary to get those ramps into position, either an engine hoist or something along that nature. Also, to pick this guy up, even with the lift as low as it'll go, this jack assembly here is quite heavy. It took using the engine hoist with that yellow strap you see there, and we just configured it in an X pattern, so we kind of lifted up this as even as we could. Got one side rested in the tracks as far as the wheels, and these wheels do pull out. They are adjustable. They'll retract in and out as needed. So we got one side seated, and then we pulled the other side out a little bit, which means that yes, this will have to be centered. This assembly will have to be pushed a little bit that way to get it more centered into the ramps. But for ease of getting on the ramps, we tilted this side on here first, got this in, pulled that end out slightly, and then as we lowered it, that side kind of went this way and then fell into place on the other rack, on the other rail there, or the other V channel, I should say. But again, yeah, this unit is quite heavy, and you're going to need a means to lift it to get it to sit onto these V grooves in between these runways. But like I said, that's pretty much it for the install of this. We'll shoot some additional video as we have time, and we'll get a couple vehicles on this lift, various different sizes and weights, and kind of show you how that works out. But other than that, that's it for now, and I'll catch you later.